This is Brainy Podcasts with Soraya Shaw and Tracy Filler, inspiring creativity and innovation through evidenced neuroscience.
Welcome to, I think this is our 15th episode that we're actually in now, which is brilliant. And we're really delighted to be introducing Alison. Alison is a journalist and writer in science, technology, psychology, and true crime, a little bit of murder, which we all love. She's also a guest speaker on narcissism, again, a little bit of thing that we're all very interested in, and coercive control, and a guest lecturer at UCL on critical thinking, which is why we invited Alison on. Alison and I have worked together in the past, and we both have a neuroscience background, so we'll be doing bits of brains every now and again. But really, it's adding to the whole message that Tracy and I are working so hard on, which is that companies really need to innovate. And there's a quote that if you aren't comparable, you're replaceable. So if we don't critically think, if we don't innovate, if we don't be creative, you know, businesses are just going to disappear. And also just people and the lives that they lead, especially with everything that's going on in the world. It's all, you know, the tumble dryer, everything's happening so fast that ability to be able to not just make decisions, but critically think about them without biases coming into it.
And one of the most important things for employees, executives and managers to consider is the fact that there is a lot of automation and analysis being replaced with AI. So if you don't add value by becoming good at critical thinking, then you will be replaced by it. There's a lot of tasks that managers used to do, which are now done by AI. This is the future, unfortunately, whether we like it or not.
Well, that's another balancing act, isn't it? Because, you know, if it's seen as a tool and a technique, as opposed to, I was reading an article yesterday that was about more companies in Silicon Valley are actually, their CEOs are AI.
Mm-hmm.
And what is that actually causing? What's actually happening? So that's another whole fascinating area that's kind of developing, which is why it becomes so important, to your point, that we really watch our own humanity and really developing our skills as humans, and, you know, the emotions, the emotional intelligence, all those things that actually create us and who we are. Just as you came on the call, we were talking about how we all love a little bit of murder, and we all like all the bad things like narcissism and stuff. And you were making reference to the mammalian brain.
Yes. Well, because as human beings, well, as you know, we have this area of the brain that's been there since day dot. The rest of the brain has developed around it over, you know, through evolution and things like this. And that part of the brain, the ancient brain, is programmed to look out for danger. This is what we had to do when humans were first on the earth. They had predators, they had to survive, you know, they had to put food on the table every day, which are all things that today we don't have to think about. We have very few predators. Of course, accidents do happen, but in the modern world, we don't have to think about those dangers as much, but that part of the brain does. This is why it's so easy to think about the negative things. You know, what did I do wrong today? What happened to me today that wasn't good? It's much harder to think about the positive things, like what did I contribute? What am I grateful for? These things take effort, and that effort is because there's this program constantly running in the background telling us you're in danger, you have to look out for that, and it's an automatic process. And this informs a lot of our thinking, like it contributes to cognitive bias and things that we're going to be talking about today. And so what we have to do is develop a way, like it's self-awareness really, develop a way of noticing when we're coming from that automatic thinking and when we're actually coming from generative thinking. We're actually thinking about thinking.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But also, I think the brain is designed for danger. And even though we don't have the predators, we don't have the saber-toothed tigers anymore, we do actually have danger all around us.
Absolutely.
And so the brain is still going through that. You know, if people's amygdalas are much more heightened than other people's, they're going to be much more aware of danger than perhaps somebody who is more balanced in the way that they kind of approach the world.
Yeah.
And that's where critical thinking becomes so important.
Yes.
To make those decisions.
Yes. And we touched on narcissism earlier, which is prevalent in the corporate boardroom and in politics, which we're not going to go into, I know. But to be aware of narcissism, I think, is it's very beneficial for people who are going into business, into management, into, executive management, that sort of thing, because it is there. There are people at the top who have, it's one thing having narcissistic traits. We all have those. We can all be narcissistic, but what I'm talking about is the malignant narcissism, which has become more a character. It's less of a trait and more of a characteristic. And of course, those people are the last people to think that there's anything wrong with them. And they can be very good leaders, we know this, but they can also create a lot of chaos in the workplace. They don't plan. They don't think critically themselves. They just, well, they do. They think critically of other people, criticizing. So there is actually research that looks into the amygdala of narcissistic people, and they found that amygdala is actually much smaller in narcissistic people because there's very little that they're scared of. Their fear center, if you like, which we all have in the brain, as you know, is not as honed as the rest of us, because being narcissists, they don't feel they have enemies that they need to be scared of. To them, it's more of a game. It's more of a, well, how can I win today? But not through fear, through actual, almost like chess playing, a power play. How can I win over that person? How can I knock that competitor out of the market? And so their fear center is less developed.
And I think we're all, perhaps our own minds now are perhaps darting around thinking of people we've worked with in the past, or perhaps current headlines that are going on, positioning where that sits right now. Let's not delve too much down there. I think we could start with just understanding a bit more about critical thinking.
Yeah.
We use the phrase critical thinking and how important it is, and we're championing that, having a better optic in education as well.
Mm-hmm.
But can we start with what is critical thinking?
So critical thinking is, in essence, it's thinking about thinking. So it's, and that's, I suppose, to define that, you would say that it's effortful. So we think all the time, we think thoughts all the time, that automatic part of the brain that's always constantly talking to itself. We don't have to put effort into that. That just happens. Critical thinking is where we actually put effort. It's effortful. We actually rationally question assumptions and evaluate the evidence that comes to us. And it's about putting that effort into making decisions that are informed rather than reacting to our emotions or previous, cognitive biases or anything else. That's the key difference in it. So critical thinking is different to divergent thinking, and I can actually talk about this better using the example of a brainstorming session. So I used to lead brainstorming sessions in corporates, and we would get everybody into a room, and I soon found that I had to actually lay down some ground rules. Because what happened was we got people brainstorming ideas, and immediately they would start to evaluate those ideas. And what that does is it then stops the creative flow, because we get into evaluating. And if people think they're being judged, they're going to stop contributing. They're going to stop the creative ideas to come out. And so I put the ground rules down where this is a brainstorming session. We're collecting creative ideas here. It doesn't matter how bizarre they are. We want to, get that creative flow, stimulate that creative flow through non-judgment. So the more bizarre your ideas are, great, just let's get them out there. The evaluation happens next time. And so that is divergent thinking, where you actually welcome all of that creativity to get the ideas. Then the critical thinking comes in when we start to evaluate those ideas, and that comes next. That's next in the process.
It reminds me, because we used to do that in my past life as well. We had one of our very first podcasts, we talked to a professor called David Wilkinson, and he gave us a wonderful way of looking at something, which was the jester, and how the jester would always hold up the mirror to what was going on around. And that strikes me as when you're having those brainstormings, and then after you're actually doing your critical thinking, you need that person who's going to question the why, because otherwise people can become so biased. If you haven't created an atmosphere where people feel secure to speak up, you're going to always get the loudest voices, and then you're going to lose any kind of real differences that might appear.
Exactly. Well, I mean, in one session I did, we had the whole company attended this. I used to run them over a sort of lunchtime. It was like a lunch hour kind of training. And we had the whole company there. And 15 minutes late, in walks the CEO. And he sits down. And of course, he's not heard the ground rules, so he doesn't have a clue. And we do this exercise where they go off in groups and talk about different clients and what they can bring into the campaigns that they were running for these clients. And he starts shouting, "Oh, that's stupid. That'll never work." And the whole room just went silent. That just killed any creative thought processes, any, thinking that was going on. And so I sort of took him out of the room. I said, "Can I just have a quick word?" And I went through the ground rules with him and told him, we're not evaluating things here. And he said, "Oh, okay, I understand now." And he came back into the room, and we managed to get going again, and it was all fine. But that happens all the time in business meetings, that people don't feel empowered to speak up. They perhaps don't feel that they have the autonomy or authority to question management decisions, top level management decisions. And I think that's very sad, because that, you're negating a lot of creative thought that could be there. You're not allowing it to come through. And you're also affecting the evaluation process, because you're not evaluating, you don't have, the whole core of ideas to evaluate. You just have one or two very few ones that may be based on the way you've done it always up to now, and you're not getting anything new.
Yeah, one of the things that critical thinking is so useful for, of course, is that decision making. And how you've described it, I've written down sort of a 3-step process of creating, evaluating, and then executing. Yes. And of course, we know in business, particularly because of the pace people are working at, they'll take the sort of overview of the problem, for example, and they might spend a minute or two looking at what the options might be, and they go straight into solutions and execution.
Yes.
And we often don't spend enough time at that front end looking at the what's, the whys, as Saraya mentioned that word why, and the reality and facts around a situation, and fully evaluate it before we step into, let's go with it, let's make that happen.
You are so very, very right. And I think that's a symptom of the age we live in. Digital technology enables us to do more faster, so we think. And so it's almost become habitual that everything has to be done quickly. And you're absolutely right. We need to take the time for that deep work. And the fear is, especially among management, that if we spend that time, we're wasting it. And but it's a fallacy, because actually, if you don't spend that time, you're not thinking deeply. You're not doing the deep work that needs to inform the best decisions. You cannot make a best decision quickly. You can make a decision quickly. If you're crossing the road at a dangerous time of day and you're not using a zebra crossing, you can make the decision, I'm going to risk this or not. Yeah, and that needs to be done quickly, because if you do it, you've got to get out the way of oncoming traffic. We can do this. But business decisions, especially at the top level, you have to give them the time for that deep, deep thinking work.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't happen instantly. To think critically, you have to take time to slow down, or even stop that automatic thinking, the desire to, well, let's just get to a solution. Let's just get to a solution as quickly as we can. Get it done now. That's ticked off, on to the next one. That process has to be silenced. I'm almost thinking of, meditative practices, which I find very difficult, because more than 5 minutes for me is like, I want to get on with the next thing. But that's what it's about. It's about stopping myself from being that automaton who wants to get on with the next thing, and actually slowing down and just, trying my best to meditate for 5 minutes and see where that takes me. Because I tell you, after I've slowed down like that, my brain is way more open to thinking, analyzing, evaluating, thinking deeply, thinking outside of the box, for want of a better phrase. That is essential, Tracy, that we do this, that we slow down and take the time.
The other thing that it put me in mind of is, you mentioned about laying down the ground rules so that there was the right shape to the conversation. And I guess that's where I thought of things like Ed de Bono or positional thinking and understanding what role you're playing. So am I in that creative space or am I in my evaluation space? Because it shifts where your brain focuses and what question it asks itself to be most useful. And that in its own right, if you're clear about the ground rules, clear about the role that you're playing in that discussion, that will naturally slow it down to a pace that gives the depth that
exactly.
No, but you've got to give people the chance to. It's almost like us having a brief, isn't it? You know, you've got to know your objectives of what that meeting is. What do you want to leave that room doing? What is everyone's role? But also then being able to let the brain make its own connections, and we know how it's all connected. And so your point to resting becomes really important, because then the default network can switch in, and you're not always just doing all the cognitive piece. So you've got the real unconscious thoughts that are coming out and connections that are being made. But it's that curiosity. That's where real thinking comes from, I think. Your critical thinking is asking those questions and being really curious about how we do it. And I think for us, for Tracy and I, the important thing about exactly what you're saying, Alison, is that company, maybe it's all because we're also, everything's done on Zoom now. So you've got an hour slot for a meeting, you've got an hour here, you've got an hour there. So you've got to reach your decision in that hour. And actually, we're creating these false timelines for ourselves that don't really exist and are so limiting. And actually, it's about how do you, as to your point, give people the space to think.
And actually, you bring up an important point, which is about time management. To free up time to think deeply, do we need all these meetings? You know, I think if you think critically about time management, you'll come up with you can probably reschedule or reassign probably a good third, maybe even 2/3 of the time that you spend in meetings at work to something, to that deep work, to something more productive. But it's almost become, as you say, a habit, since COVID now. Well, meetings, we can have meetings over Zoom. We can have meetings whenever we want now. But do we need to? Critical thinking is about questioning. It's not necessarily about cynicism for cynicism's sake. But it's about asking the question, is this necessary? If you absolutely need to elicit the information or ideas from other people, absolutely it's necessary. And I don't think we question these, how we use our time in business. We don't actually critically think about that, which is odd.
Tracy's a whiz on AI. I just learned so much. She's brilliant at it. But actually, one thing that we were talking about was that Tracy was using it to solve critically think, actually, weren't you? And actually what it did was it took her deeper and deeper and deeper to actually really, really think about what she was doing. So that was a really quite interesting learning from you, Tracy, how people are using AI as a quick thing, but actually for you, it really made you question and go much deeper than you would have gone.
Yeah, which I think is our job as a coach, because people often come with this full head, and the curiosity that creates the questions that serve the client do exactly that. They first of all say, throw out the stuff that isn't really that important, and then let's start honing in on what does matter, and then let them do the deep dive on that so that they can come away with clarity or known actions, whatever the outcome might be. It's interesting you raised up that example, because I know exactly what you're talking about. One of the panics that it set in me, and I'd be really interested in Alison's view, and I don't mind putting myself out there vulnerable, I do that in these pods anyway, is I now started to panic for what's my idea and what's AI's, and can I now think still? Because I am learning to play and ask the right questions. You always say, Soraya, and we know with neuroscience that we just need to ask the right question of our brain and it figures it out. But AI isn't hugely different to that. If you know what questions or how to get it to interpret what you're asking, it gives you a wealth of information that you can pick your way through. And it comes to the point where you kind of go, where's my brain in this? Where's my thoughts? What's authentic to me, Tracy Filler?
It's brilliant. It's a brilliant thing that you've brought up, because that is exactly where we are right now. And interestingly, Microsoft Not sure of the specifics of it, but Microsoft works with Cambridge University. I think they fund a research department, but they have some Microsoft highbrow researchers in this department, and they've just released the findings of some research they did on the use of AI and does it actually damage critical thinking. And there was some very interesting things that came out of that, which were the higher confidence people have in generative AI to solve their problems, the less critically they think. Whereas the higher self-confidence people have in their own ability, the more critically they think and the more they can use AI to, through specific prompting, they can use AI to help them. And the research brought up a concept for me, which is described as stewardship. And I think this is what you're talking about, Tracy, which is where you actually become good at how you prompt AI to help you. And that's what Microsoft refers to in this study as stewardship. So it's not that you allow AI to do all the thinking for you. What AI is good at is getting to the core information, the core data quickly. That's where and how and why it should be used, because for us to do that ourselves, Google search or using some of the academic search platforms, it would take us, hours, days even. And AI can do that very quickly. But of course, the stewardship comes into how you actually prompt it to get to think deeply. And that's what we need to learn. If we're to use AI constructively to help us think critically, we need to learn how to become AI stewards.
That's a really interesting phrase they've come up with, because stewardship is known as a leadership style.
Right.
So it's taking the lead on AI. It's a human-led initiative.
I was just about to say, though, what advice would you give to businesses who are using AI to how they take that stewardship to get better thinking?
Gosh, I think I could probably write a book about that. But
okay.
I think it actually, companies can take leadership by finding out how their employees should use AI. But then, and training them with crib sheets about, how to do it, how to write the best prompts, depending on what kind of information you're trying to get out of the system, that sort of thing. But I think it's more an individual thing that employees have to actually take on themselves to become better stewards. I mean, AI is just a tool. Just like back in the day, when I first started in journalism, I literally used to handwrite my articles and pick up the phone to a sub-editor and read it to him or her, and they would type it into a big printing machine. I mean, this is how it was archaic. It seems archaic. And so then computers came along and everyone had a computer on their desk. And some people were up in arms about this, saying, oh, they're going to take over the world and we won't have any jobs. But no, computers were just a tool. Same as then the internet comes along, and that's just a tool as well. And these are all tools that we need to learn to use. Again, if we go back to primitive times, we started learning how to use tools. We found a rock and we found we could shape it into like an arrowhead, and that helped us, bring food home. These are just tools. We have to learn how to use them. But I think it's essential that companies take a leadership stance on this, and instead of scaring their employees by, AI is going to make you less critically thinking, and AI is going to damage this, it's going to damage that, and it's going to take your jobs and all this. No. Teach them that this is a brilliant tool, just like the rest of the tools that they have in their arsenal, to do more deep work and to help them with critical thinking. You don't obviously allow the AI to just go, run ahead with a prompt and don't ever question what it comes back with. No, you must, like we were saying earlier about the collection of evidence and then the evaluation of the evidence. That's the key bit. The AI tells you something and you evaluate, well, is this correct? Is this right? Can I use another source to corroborate what the AI is telling me? Is there an expert that I can ask? Is there another AI platform. I could, I've often done this with Perplexity and Claude AI and ChatGTP, compare what they all say, see if there's a pattern. And if they're all very different, then I know the information is probably less credible. I think the key is to always question, what's the evidence? How do we know this? How can we corroborate this? And as a journalist, that's always what you would never write an article with just one person giving their views and opinions. You would always, use that person's views and opinions, but then you'd get another view and opinion of somebody else who may have a different view or may back up this view. It's all about questioning all the time. And also prompting. Before you write a prompt, you have to say exactly what information specifically do I want from this. And if you don't know, and that's okay, and you put a general prompt in there, you just know that you're going to get general information back. But then that will enable you, when you read that information, to say, I want to know more about that specific point. So you ask the AI, tell me more about that specific point, and also give me the evidence to back it up, and let me see the citations that you've used. And as Tracy said, go in deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper all the time. And again, that takes time. But this is the deep work that we need to do.
But where's the bit? Because I agree with all that. And I think it's fabulous. And, even the citations, you have to go and check them, because most of the time I've found they don't actually exist. But also there's something wonderful about two humans talking together, isn't there? You spark off each other, your ideas, you become so focused. It's almost like, Star Trek mind meld, you kind of meld together. And so I think it's important not to lose that humanity around it as well. We can use AI and it's fabulous, but you're not having a conversation, you're not sharing, you're not going, well, that's interesting, but how about this? And then that sparks something else off, because that's how, as that's how our brains work. And it's that human piece that becomes, and I know it's changing now with hybrid, where people are going back into the office. So that's brilliant, because they can have those conversations again. But I think this is where, to your point, it's being really clear that AI is a tool. It is not a human relationship, that we have this wonderful synergy together.
Soraya, do you remember Ross saying that we need to double down on being human?
Yeah.
And that sort of keeps coming back to my head, listening to some of the examples that you've been sharing, Alison. Always question, always collaborate, and always contribute. They're the three things that sort of came out of that last discussion. And it's helped me today with thinking about this tension between, am I depending on it too much? But actually, maybe I've just got better versed at utilising it as a tool. So that was helpful for me. So thank you very much.
And I think actually Soraya is right in pointing that out, because I think there will be some people who unfortunately have that sort of mindset where they do see AI as a human. And, and this is only going to increase because these AI tools are getting better and better and better and better. Obviously, I've studied neuroscience and psychology and things like that. So I like to think that I can pretty much separate myself from a robot, a computer robot, and a human being. But I have, occasionally, when there's been, something personal, very tough, that's personal going on with me, I say to, I will use AI to help me get clarity on that issue, even though it's a personal issue. And I'll say, well, recently we were in the care home situation with my 93-year-old father. And I just got to a sort of place of overwhelm, and I couldn't think straight. And so I said to ChatGTP, I said, this is the situation. My father needs this. I've been told this. The local council's that. What are my options? And it came up with a bunch of options, that half of which I hadn't even considered, because I was so in the situation that I couldn't think clearly. So in that situation, that I think that's a healthy way of using a tool like AI, not as a human substitute, but as just a way of, because if I'd had to phone the council, or if I'd had to phone some other professional, it might have taken me 3 days, maybe even a week, maybe a couple of weeks to get an appointment, to get to the point that AI brought me to, where I had these options.
There's the danger of becoming anthropomorphic and seeing it as
Yes,
I love that word.
Yes,
Yeah,
I've heard that word so many times, and I just looked it up the other day to find out what it really means. And you're absolutely right. Yes.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell our listeners
what it means? Well, it means when you take something, when you believe that they've got a human understanding and personality, so you develop that one-to-one personal relationship with them, like a dog or an animal, or your kettle or whatever it might be. And actually,
am I in fear
human.
of that when I always say please and thank you to it?
Oh, yes. I do that with
inanimate objects. You're so polite. Yeah.
She said to me last week, "You're really polite with your AI."
Well, I am as well. I always say please and thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. See, I'm not weird.
I think it's important, but I think what's quite interesting as well, what you're saying is, so I did my whole dissertation on stress, basically, and resilience and well-being, mental well-being. And actually, what you're saying is that the AI is actually helping people diffuse that stress and be more resilient, because it can help them answer something very quickly, and really get to the point of it. So when perhaps you don't have anybody else to talk to, and again, but that's your fine line between how does it then stay as a tool and not part of your life, but it actually can make such a difference to your well-being, essentially.
Yes, because it's objective, it's completely emotionless. Whereas I, at that point in time, was completely, full of cortisol, stressed to the nth degree, and overwhelmed. And so in that specific case, it helped.
Yeah.
But I think the people who create these LLMs need to factor in some of this so that they can tell if, by the wording, by the prompt, the wording in the prompt that someone's using, they can actually tell whether they're treating the AI as a human substitute or not. And I don't know. I'm not a developer. I'm not a coder. I'm not, I don't understand any of that. But I'm pretty sure it must be possible to have some kind of algorithms in there or some kind of coding in there that spots these trends. If you can create an LLM in the first place, surely you can do this. And I think the smart ones will incorporate that into there and say things like, have it say back to you, just a warning, like, I think it's important you should consult a specialist.
Yeah, have you spoken to a friend about this as well?
Yes.
Or, maybe it's time to go and collaborate with somebody on this and get somebody else's ideas apart from mine, or what we've managed to give you or something like that. So that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
But there's, Alison, I don't know whether you saw it, Tracy. There was a piece of research, it might have come out of Cambridge, or it was on YouTube or something like that. And it was a researcher or a professor who last year had been working with LLMs for emergency calls from the police and fire brigade and people like that. And it couldn't pick up the subtleties of so the conversation was, I need to order a Domino's. And they're going, well, this is the police. Why are you? Yes, I know you're busy. And they picked up that they were in danger. That person couldn't say they're in danger. Whereas the LLMs at that point can do it. And a year later, she went back and did exactly the same thing. And it had developed so much that it picked it up immediately.
Yeah.
It picked up the nuances of what was actually going on.
Yeah. See if we can do that. I'm sure we can do it with these, large language models. Yeah. Definitely.
Do you mind if we ask you now, because one thing for Tracy and I is about part of our agenda is these being taught in education, because the UK critical thinking is not on the agenda anymore. It's completely disappeared. And you're a lecturer in critical thinking. How important? What is going on there? What's happening?
Yeah, well, business is basically, it's being driven from business. Businesses are demanding critical thinking as a skill. This is mainly in higher education, which I got to say, I think is a mistake. I think we need to bring it in much younger. Kids can understand. Kids of sort of 9, 10, 11, 12 can understand way more than we give them credit for, I think. And critical thinking is one of the things we have to introduce much earlier on. But at the moment, it's kind of confined more to higher education. And this is essential because in business, in education, it's called problem-based learning. and it demands critical thinking. In business, most decisions are centered around problems, and they happen to be complex problems. We used to call them wicked problems, but now we've started calling them by what they really are, which is complex problems. And to solve a complex problem, you need critical thinking, because you need to be able to collect a complex series of information and evaluate it in a specific way, so that you can then get to some options and finally a course of action that you're going to take. And all of that along the whole process demands critical thinking based around problem-based learning. And these problems often don't have a solution. Take an example, right? We're taking a student on a scenario week, and we have Tata Consulting. Now, Tata Consulting is part of the Tata company, and Tata now owns Jaguar Land Rover and various other automotive companies. And they, obviously, one of the challenges they've got is building electric cars to cut down on the use of fossil fuels. While they're doing this, to cut down on the use of fossil fuels, what we're doing is creating another industry, which is manufacturing electric batteries. Now, what does that use? Well, lithium, copper, silicon, all of these things are being taken out of the ground. So here's the problem we have. We're trying to stop using fossil fuels by creating other mining industries. That's not really solving, the environmental issues that the world has right now. And there is no panacea. We have to create, in many governments, particularly in the West, we're being mandated to get more electric cars on the road. We have to create these, but we have to start mining precious minerals in order to do it. This is a problem. How do we overcome it? Well, there is no panacea. You've got to do the mining. You've got to create the electric vehicles. So what are we going to do to compensate for the damage we're creating to the environment? Well, let's invest in these areas where they come from. And they're usually poor areas of the world, like the African continent, for example. Let's make sure we invest in the people. Let's make sure we invest in their environment. Let's make sure we invest in their education, because we need to create employees of the future. And let's plant some trees, and go further than that. Let's make sure we create more green spaces and other things. I mean, I'm putting out, these specific examples. There are many more, and there are much deeper examples. What I'm saying is, in business, there's no whole solution. There's nothing that's going to solve every problem we have in a business. It is about thinking critically about the options and making the best decision for all the stakeholders involved. And that's why we need to educate about critical thinking. We need to teach students how to do it. I'll give you one example of where our students start off. On the first day of term, we did we had 103 students in a lecture theatre, and we said to them, where do you get your news? And over 80% of them said they got their news from social media. That's kind of a little bit scary, because how do they know that that news is real? How do they know that it's not biased? How do they know that it comes from a credible source? How do they know that it's actually true? And none of them seemed to think that was a big deal. That told us that they're not trained to think critically. If they get the news from social media and they don't question it, they're not trained to think critically. And so there's another thing I was going to mention. It's gone out of my head. Students are not trained to think critically. No.
Yeah, the last question we always ask is,
what do you do to create joy and laughter amongst your team?
Okay, I'm a bit of a comedian. I can't help it. I suppose it was a way of getting attention when I was young. So I like to tell jokes, and they're not all good. Some of them are terrible, but I like to create a light atmosphere, if you like. But what I always do is try and play a trick on myself and other people. And like when I'm walking along the street, for example, I'll just smile at somebody who's coming the opposite way. And it's amazing the number of times people are so surprised because they're not expecting it. And they say, oh, good morning. And it's just that, it's a tiny thing, but it just makes that connection between me and a stranger. And I think they feel good and I feel good. And so for a team, it's always important to surprise people with, say, a bit of praise or a compliment, but it's not something they're expecting. So I'm not suggesting that you just give people compliments for no reason. I think there's such a lot, especially in the workplace, makes us feel bad about ourselves. We're not good enough. We've got this imposter syndrome going on. We've just been criticized and nobody's praised us. Yeah, there's all of this, and workplace bullying, which of course is a whole other topic. So I think it's good as a manager or a leader of some description, go above and beyond and just say something supportive. That was a great piece of work you did, or the way you said that in the meeting was fantastic, or the way you approached that problem was exceptional. Just something like that. Just find something.
What I love about that example is they have to notice it in the first place.
Exactly. And I think because of what we talked about earlier, which was the mammalian brain, we don't notice these good things, or it's effortful to notice the good things. And I think that's why, journaling is so good, because I kept a gratitude journal for a couple of months. And the question, what are you grateful for today? And it was like, well, I don't know. You have to think effortfully about, what's happened today, what went well, what surprised me, what pleasant things am I thankful for. It is effortful because it's not the way we naturally think. And so, if I'm going to leave a lasting impression on anyone today, I would say to them, do what is unnatural. Put effort into thinking.
What a wonderful way to finish that recording with that phrase.
Enjoyed this episode? Listen to more at brainycasts.com.